Personally, I follow something that is called people first. So we don't say an albino. We say someone with albinism. We don't say that kid is blind. He is someone with blindness. It's the person first. So we try to respect and say that the kid before that. So my son is a child with Charge syndrome.
Here.
Yeah.
It's kind of very opposite.
When Ruth and I decided to adopt, and they called us and said that this child was deafblind and he has Charge syndrome, we did what everyone would do. We looked at each other and said, what on earth is Charge syndrome? We had no idea. And there was no Google in '98. So we got online and we looked for what we could find, but we couldn't find much at all. And we were what we like to call blissfully naive. We were so excited to become parents, and we can do this. He's just deafblind, we got this. We didn't realize the multitude of surgeries that he was going to have. He had half a dozen surgeries before he was 3. And we did not realize all those things. And immediately we started with the feeding tube, and then surgery on his throat, surgery on his heart. It really went from there. We didn't realize it, but we would still do it. Absolutely. It's been worth it because he's so fun.
Brandon's biological mother was 15 when she gave birth to him. She had planned on placing him for adoption before they knew that he had special needs. They didn't know that he had Charge syndrome until he was born. I can only imagine now being a mom of a 16-year-old, how difficult that must have been for her and for her mother. We wrote to her regularly during his first year. We took a ton of pictures and sent them to her. She was very concerned about his health. The agency that placed him, they were also very concerned. And so they gave us a lot of freedom to be able to share information.
When we first adopted Brandon, they said he has deafblindness, or he's someone who's deafblind. We thought what every American thinks. We can teach Brandon to speak and to work with his blindness, just like Helen Keller's parents did. And he'll just one day be a college student and then a professional who overcame deafblindness. I didn't have the educational understanding of multiple disabilities at the time. Brandon was 2 weeks old, and I was feeding him his last bottle of the night. And while I was feeding him, all of a sudden his whole body went stiff, and he shook, and then he went completely limp and started to turn gray. And I said, oh my goodness, I don't think he's breathing. And Ruth and I both panicked, and we laid him on the bed, and he was not breathing. Here was a 14-day-old baby. So we ran into the living room, and Ruth called 911, and she was talking me through it. So I put my mouth over his nose and mouth, and I blew and pressed down on his chest, and a few more times, and then he finally coughed a little and started to breathe again. And the paramedics came, and Ruth and I lost it, and they took him to the hospital, and we found out that Brandon, aside from being deafblind, he would aspirate. He's what they call a silent aspirator, so everything that he was drinking was going into his lungs. So when they did a test, they realized his lungs were 80% full of fluid. The doctors put him on something called a nasal feeding tube, where we put a tube up his nose down into his stomach, and that's how we would feed him. And that really is how we realized things were going to be different.
Let's go grab his bag.
Yeah.
Thank you. And raise your hand. You raise your hand. Brandon's your name. Raise your hand. Show me that hand.
Once a child with his disabilities, he goes to a great school now, but once he turns 22, he ages out of that school, or the school system, unfortunately, isn't able to provide for them later than that. So when we realized that he was turning 17, I started looking at what schools were available for him as an adult. So I took my daughter Mindy and we went and we visited a school, and we really didn't like what they offered. They're a great program, but it's more for people that have just one disability or are still able to function. To have someone with a severe level of disability, there really weren't a lot of centers out there that, if any, that offered help for my son.
We knew, okay, our time is ticking away until he's 22, and we are going to need to have something that we would be happy with him going to every day.
The system is set up so that parents are provided the supports basically through education with their needs through age 22, and then they transition out of public school. And so between age 23 and 65, when we start recognizing that people need services as aging folks, they're in no man's land in terms of services specifically. Like in the state of Utah, we have 2,700 people on waiting lists, and some folks have been on the waiting list for 18 and more years. Health issues or major behavior issues, that person, I bet, will never receive formalized services. They'll be dependent upon their family and their community to figure out how are we going to do this.
Where I worked at the time, I noticed that they were starting to downsize. Things were heading that way. The writing was on the wall. So I talked to my wife about it, and we figured, who needs a savings account? Who needs a 401k? And I cashed that in, traded that in, and we used that to open Barrow Care. Barrow Care's main service is the day center, the day service that we provide. When we pick them up in the morning, and we drive all over Salt Lake Valley, and we bring them in, and they spend 6 hours with us. I take great pride in the fact that we don't just bring them in and plop them in front of a television. We bring them in and we have educational programs for them. We have physical activities for them.
We really wanted to create a place for kids like Brandon, who their parents were met with the same challenges we were when they looked at other centers. So we built a criteria for admission to Barrow Care to be served that you have to score a certain amount, and each characteristic has a kind of a point value assigned to it.
So someone who is deafblind, that's 2 points. Someone who's in a wheelchair, that's 1 point. G-tube fed, 2 points. And they have to score at least 8 points to come to Barrow Care. So if someone comes to us and says, we have a child who has autism, well, that's a syndrome, that's 1. He's still in a diaper, that's 2. But if that's all that they have, he might not fit because they might be aggressive, they might be violent, and we can't have students like that around the fragile population we work with.
So the idea is we aren't coming in and taking over life 24/7, but what we're doing is saying 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, which is very similar to what these individuals have experienced in school. They are out of the home and learning, developing, continuing to grow, and parents can work, they can go to school, they can take a break. They can do what most parents would be doing at the age of 22 for their child, which is not taking care of them.
No, there weren't any programs out there for us. There wasn't anyone that could take care of him and keep me happy and keep the progression that he needed going on until Barrow Care came along, and then they showed us what they could offer.
There's a very big need for services like this that can, address this growing population. As technology and medical technology gets better, we've been able to prolong the lives of children and young adults a lot longer. And so the services like Barrow Care are needed, absolutely.
I can't say enough for Barrow Care and what Mike does with the kids. And Mike was doing that pressure therapy on him, and I had not seen him relax to touch in years, and it was within seconds. of Mike doing that. And I was like, okay, I put him in the right place here.
What I've learned is that every day you need to move forward, really. In life, we learn from yesterday and we strive for tomorrow, but life is right now. Life is one eternal right now. So what are you doing right now to make things better for yourself, for the future? So 20 years ago, if you had told me that a restaurant managing burger flipper would be opening a center for people with multiple disabilities, that's impossible. That's not going to happen. But I am who my son Brandon made me. Really.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Brandon. Happy birthday to you. Good job.